Hi guys, Luton here. Right, I've got a bit of a curious story one for you today. It's a bit of a story, something I've thought about for a while, wanted to make. My intro, by the way, I don't even have an intro for this channel, so that's just my my sort of dramatic Luton intro. Okay, so today's story is this weird one about a game, Civilization 2. Now this isn't my game playing, it's actually a story of somebody else's game. You may have heard it already, but for those people that hadn't, it's just a really interesting story. Now Civilization it's a pretty old game. It's been around for, I mean, we're talking way over 10 years old. I don't even know now. It's an old game, and it's a strategy game, not unlike Age of Empires, things like that. It starts off in the Stone Age, but this one will take you right up to the far future. Now this one guy, Lycerius, ended up it got posted on Reddit, his story of his game, and it turned out that he's actually been playing this game for 10 years now. He does clarify that he hasn't been playing it 10 years straight. He has been playing it intermittently over a 10-year period. But unlike most games of Civilization, or any kind of sort of age strategy game, where usually one side becomes victorious over time, the interesting thing about his is that no side seemed to be able to win. It just became this horrific, brutal stalemate. And I'll read to you his description of what happened in the game. And I think the game itself, you got to remember that it's got old graphics, etc. But what was so amazing about the game was the ability to kind of move through time, and you'd have sort of naval forces, military forces, but you'd also have civilian forces. It's all part and parcel. You have to build it up together. So let me just read to you his whole description of the events. So he says, "I've been playing the same game of Civ 2 for 10 years. Though long outdated, I grew fascinated with this particular game because by the time Civ 3 was released, I was already well into the distant future. I then thought that it might be interesting to see just how far into the future I could get and see what the ramifications would be. Naturally, I play other games and have a life, but I often return to this game when I'm not doing anything and carry on. The results are as follows. The world is a hellish nightmare of suffering and devastation. There are 3 remaining super nations in the year 3991 AD, each competing for scant resources left on the planet after dozens of nuclear wars have rendered vast swathes of the world uninhabitable wastelands. The ice caps have melted over 20 times somehow, due primarily to the many nuclear wars. As a result, every inch of land in the world that isn't a mountain is an inundated swampland useless to farming, most of which is also irradiated anyway. As a result, big cities are a thing of the distant past. Roughly 90% of the world's population at its peak 2,000 years ago has died, either from nuclear annihilation or famine caused by the global warming that has left absolutely zero arable land to farm. Engineers, which are late game worker units, are always busy continuously building roads so that new armies can reach the front lines, roads that are destroyed the very next turn when the enemy goes, so there isn't any time to clean up swamps or clear up the nuclear fallout. Only 3 massive super nations are left, the Celts, which is him, the Vikings and Americans. I love that the Vikings have made it to 3991. Between the 3 of us, we have conquered all the other nations that have ever existed and assimilated them into our respective empires. You've heard of the 100-Year War? Try the 1700-Year War. The 3 remaining nations have been locked in an eternal death struggle for almost 2,000 years. Peace seems to be impossible. Every time a ceasefire is signed, the Vikings will surprise attack me, or the Americans the very next turn, often with nuclear weapons. Even when the UN forces a peace treaty, so I can only assume that peace will come only when they're wiped out. I love that despite all this, there's still a UN as well. It is this that perpetuates the war ad infinitum. Have any of you old Civ 2 players out there ever had this problem in the post-late game? Because he was actually trying to resolve this problem. This is what's so funny about this, is that he actually doesn't want it to be like this. He's trying to resolve the world, but the game won't let him. It just will not allow any kind of growth anymore. Because of SDI, ICBMs are usually only used against armies outside of cities. Instead, cities are constantly attacked by spies who plant nuclear devices which then detonate, something I greatly miss from later Civ games. Usually the downside to this is that every nation in the world declares war on you, but this is already the case, so it's no longer a deterrent to anybody, myself included. The only governments left are 2 theocracies and myself, a communist state. I wanted to stay a democracy, but the Senate would always overrule me when I wanted to declare war before the Vikings did. This would delay my attack and render my turn and after my plans useless, and of course the Vikings would then break the ceasefire like clockwork the very next turn. Something I also miss in latest Civ games is a little internal politics. So he says, I was forced to do away with democracy roughly 1,000 years ago because it was endangering my empire. But of course the people hate me now, and every few years since then there is a massive guerrilla late game barbarians uprising in the heart of my empire that I have to deal with, which saps resources from the war effort. So he's got multiple things. He's dealing with his own people being a problem as well as everything else. The military stalemate is airtight. The post-late game in Civ 2 is perfectly balanced because all remaining nations already have all technologies, so nobody has an advantage. And there are so many units at once on the map that you could lose 20 tank units and not have your lines dented because you have a constant stream moving to the front. So as soon as anybody gets taken out, more guys move up and move up and move up because everything that's left is just geared towards war. So it's just this, never-ending brutal war. This also means that cities are not only tiny towns full of starving people, but that you can never improve the city. So you want a granary so you can eat? Sorry, I have to build another tank instead, maybe next time. So he says his goal for the next few years is to try and end the war, and thus then use engineers to clear swamps and fallout so that farming may resume. I want to rebuild the world, but I'm not sure how. He says, if any of you old Civ 2 players have any advice, I'm listening. And then it goes on. He has a whole other subreddit now. Loads of people got interested in this story and have sort of tried to contribute to turning things around. But I just think it's so awesome that you can have this game come out now and in the way that it has for him. It's just really unusual because... And also when you sort of think back to how games were then, you just had these limited graphics and people relied a lot more on their own imagination to sort of make games what they were. Whereas now, they tend to be sort of almost given to you. Everything is so cinematic when you think about games like Heavy Rain or things like this, or even Metal Gear Solid 4, where a lot of it is very, very cinematic and you almost play the part of just sort of filling in the gaps and making the choices. You don't really make it your own, so you're kind of just playing the role. Whereas with these games, you had to kind of create the story for yourself. You had to kind of make it your own, and it's just amazing as well. Amazing that he's kind of ended up in this sort of situation, because so many of these games, you would expect to have a victor at some point where the sides are fighting it out, maybe low on resources, they have a bit of an advantage over the others, but he's ended up in this situation where everything is perfectly balanced and it's just become this horrific, deadly stalemate. It reminds you of like Warhammer 40,000 or something, when it's like in the grim distance of the far future there is only war. Well, that's exactly what he's got in this Civ game. It's like the brutal future, and like the engineers that are sort of left to clear things up. It makes you think of games like Fallout or something, where you have the Brotherhood and they're trying to sort of rebuild the world, and he's trying his best to actually solve this. I think that's the key point as well. He doesn't actually, that's what's so funny about it, he doesn't actually want it to be like this. He wants to be able to kind of rebuild the world, make a treaty, make some kind of forward progress, but he can't, because every time he tries to make any play, like as a diplomatic or offensive, he just gets nuked into the ground by the enemies and they just never get anywhere. It's a really sort of comedy, amusing story. It's kind of grim, but it's also funny that you can't break out of this thing, and that the game's been going on for so long, which in itself is very, very unusual. So I hope you've enjoyed this one today, guys. I say a little bit different, but I hope you enjoy the story. Any of you older gamers, I'm sure, will appreciate it, but I hope some of you new guys will sort of try and take on board what's really great about this story. I'm just going to leave you with a couple of stills that he took himself that show how the game has been playing out, and yep, there we go. I'll see you next time. Okay, so here we see what's left of the world, and you can see that it's split into these three territories of the Celtic here in the west, Vikings to the north, and Americans to the east. So they're fighting each other constantly on two fronts against one another, and it just means that this eternal struggle that they cannot get around. Okay, the next one up, it says, this is all that's left of Japan, Greece, and the Sioux nation. A few small towns spread across vast wastelands of swamps, nuclear fallout, and old roads. Most cities have disappeared altogether, and you can just see by all the skulls, everything's just been wiped out. Okay, here we go. And then the last one, this front line here hasn't moved in almost 1,000 years. Whenever conventional forces start to make progress, they just get nuked. These cities often change hands but are never kept for long by either side. It's such a hilarious situation. So go check out his Reddit to find out more, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this, just a little bit of a more kind of story based video today. It was a curious thing, and maybe if I find out and hear some more little bits and pieces like this in time, or thoughts, I'll post some more videos like this. Hope you've enjoyed, guys. As always, if you enjoyed, drop it a like, and I'll see you next time.